He thought he had time. Nathan Cole was 64 years old when his body finally forced him to face a truth he had avoided his entire life. For decades, he believed time was something earned, after sacrifice, after effort, after success. Before we get deep into the story, do take a few minutes to subscribe to this account so you don't miss out on more beautiful stories coming up. He treated life like a reward system: endure first, live later. That belief kept him moving forward without ever stopping to look around. Greyhaven reflected that mindset. A city of steel, glass, and constant motion. A place that never waited. Nathan fit perfectly. He woke before dawn, filled his days with urgency, and measured his worth by productivity. Silence made him uneasy. Stillness felt like failure. On the morning everything changed, the warnings were there. Tightness in his chest. Fatigue he blamed on age. Signals he had learned to ignore. He had trained himself to see discomfort as weakness. Then his heart failed him. The collapse came quietly. One moment routine, the next darkness. His body, loyal for decades, simply stopped cooperating. When awareness returned, it came in fragments: light, sound, pressure. And then understanding. Nathan was no longer in control. That realization frightened him more than the pain. Control had been his identity. Without it, he felt exposed. As hours passed, the outside world faded. No meetings waited. No deals depended on him. The world continued without Nathan Cole. That thought unsettled him deeply. With nothing to distract him, memory took over. He remembered his early career, when ambition felt noble and exhaustion felt temporary. He believed pressure would ease at the next level. It never did. Memories pulled him back to a home filled with laughter and plans. To moments he postponed. Invitations declined. Evenings shortened. All justified by the belief that there would be time later. The truth arrived slowly. Later had already passed. His children's childhoods lived in fragments. Milestones noticed late. Presence replaced by absence. He had confused provision with connection. Lying there, he understood the cost. The mind replays what cannot be changed when escape is impossible. Missed moments resurfaced with clarity. Rest refused. Joy postponed. Connection avoided. He had believed slowing down meant falling behind. The most painful memories were simple ones, moments when people needed him, not for what he provided, but for who he was. One question returned again and again. If his life had ended that morning, what would truly remain? Titles faded. Achievements blurred. Success meant little without people to share it with. He had built a life that looked impressive but felt incomplete. Recovery brought clarity, not relief. Even then, his instinct was to plan his return to productivity. But a quieter awareness resisted. What if returning to normal meant returning to the life that nearly ended him? At home, time moved differently. Stillness exposed him. Regret grew louder, not for risks taken, but for moments never lived. He realized most regret comes not from mistakes, but from neglect. Time does not announce its departure. It disappears. Nathan stepped away from his career quietly. Identity faded slowly. Awareness replaced it. He began measuring life by attention, not output. By presence, not productivity. Healing was slow. Imperfect. There were moments of grief, for lost decades, for people who waited too long. But there was gratitude. Gratitude for a warning instead of an ending. He stopped postponing joy. Stopped assuming tomorrow would cooperate. Mortality followed him, not as fear, but as grounding. Youth wastes time believing it owns it. Age understands urgency because it understands loss. Nathan no longer lived for someday. Someday was an illusion. Life existed only where attention was given. At 64, Nathan Cole finally stopped waiting. The clock was still ticking. But now, he was listening. Please like, comment, share and subscribe to this account. Nathan Cole did not wake up transformed. Awareness did not arrive like a revelation or a clean break from the past. It arrived quietly, unevenly, and with resistance. Old habits do not loosen their grip simply because truth has been seen. They linger, waiting for moments of weakness. In the weeks after his recovery, Nathan noticed how easily urgency tried to reclaim him. How instinctively his mind reached for structure, for productivity, for proof that he was still useful. Decades of conditioning do not disappear overnight. But something had shifted. The urgency no longer felt noble. It felt familiar and dangerous. Nathan became acutely aware of how often life attempted to pull him back into unconscious momentum. Notifications. Expectations. The subtle pressure to return to who he had been. He realized that most people never change because the world rewards consistency more than awareness. Change, he discovered, required friction. Days slowed in uncomfortable ways. Without constant distraction, thoughts stretched longer. Silence lingered. And in that silence, grief continued to surface, not in waves now, but in steady reminders. He noticed how many routines existed only to keep discomfort at bay. How often busyness acted as anesthesia. Without it, emotions demanded attention. Nathan began revisiting places he had ignored for years, not physically, but mentally. Seasons of his life he had rushed through without reflection now returned with sharper detail. The memories no longer accused him. They simply existed, unchangeable. That was harder. He began to understand that regret was not meant to punish. It was meant to instruct. To show where awareness had been absent. Some days were heavier than others. There were mornings when guilt settled into his chest before he even stood up. Moments when he wished the warning had arrived earlier, before so much had been lost quietly. But time offered no refunds. Only responsibility. Nathan noticed how easily people around him assumed he was better simply because he was healed. Bodies recover faster than identities. Internally, he was still dismantling decades of beliefs about worth, success, and purpose. He had once believed value came from output. Now he questioned whether output had ever been the point. Nathan began paying attention to how people reacted to his presence rather than his performance. Conversations felt different when he was not mentally elsewhere. He noticed pauses. Expressions. Subtle emotional shifts he had once overlooked entirely. It surprised him how much connection had always been available, waiting patiently beneath his distraction. He also noticed resistance within himself. A discomfort with being fully present. Vulnerability did not feel natural. Awareness required effort. Some days he longed for the numb simplicity of routine. But he could not unsee what he had seen. The understanding followed him everywhere. Time was not endless. And neither was avoidance. Nathan began measuring days differently. Not by what he completed, but by what he noticed. By moments when attention did not drift. By instances where he chose presence even when it felt inconvenient. Progress was uneven. There were setbacks, days lost to old patterns, moments when he caught himself rushing again, postponing again. Awareness did not make him immune to habit. It only made him accountable. That accountability was exhausting at first. But it was also grounding. Nathan started to see how many people around him were still waiting. Waiting for retirement. Waiting for less stress. Waiting for the right time to live differently. He recognized himself in them. And that recognition was unsettling. He understood now that most people do not fail to live meaningful lives because they lack opportunity. They fail because they believe meaning can be postponed. Nathan no longer believed that. The future no longer felt like a destination. It felt fragile. Conditional. Mortality remained close, not as fear, but as context. A quiet presence reminding him that days were not interchangeable. That each carried weight simply because it existed. He found himself drawn to simplicity. To fewer commitments. To less noise. He noticed how little was actually necessary to feel grounded. The most profound change was internal. Nathan no longer needed to feel indispensable. The realization was liberating. The world did not require his constant effort to function. People did not need him exhausted to feel supported. His worth did not increase with strain. That understanding dismantled a lifetime of assumptions. Some evenings, grief returned unexpectedly. A memory. A realization of something that would never be reclaimed. Nathan allowed those moments now. He did not rush past them. Avoidance had cost him too much already. Acceptance did not erase loss. It made room for it. Nathan understood something he had never learned in his youth. Life does not reward speed. It rewards attention. He no longer waited for permission to slow down. He no longer delayed joy until conditions improved. He stopped treating awareness as something reserved for later years. Later was never guaranteed. The clock continued ticking. But it no longer frightened him. What frightened him now was slipping back into unconscious living, into the quiet wasting of days. Nathan Cole did not become extraordinary. He became awake. And that, he understood, was rare enough. Nathan Cole noticed the quiet first. Not silence, but the absence of pressure. The constant internal pull to prove something had loosened its grip. For the first time in his life, he was not racing toward the future or fleeing from the present. Days arrived without urgency. And instead of feeling them automatically, Nathan let them unfold. He realized how much of his life had been shaped by noise, expectations, deadlines, identities imposed and accepted without question. Without that noise, he felt unfamiliar to himself. But also lighter. Nathan had once believed legacy was something you built. A career. A reputation. A name that outlived you. Now, he understood legacy differently. Legacy lived in what remained after presence was removed. In how people felt when you were no longer performing for them. In whether your absence created emptiness or relief. This realization unsettled him. Because legacy was not something he could manufacture at the end. It had been forming quietly all along. There were things Nathan could not repair. Years lost to distraction. Moments that would never repeat. Versions of people who had moved on without him fully knowing them. Acceptance did not mean forgiveness from others. It meant honesty with himself. He stopped asking what could have been and began asking what still could be, without illusion, without fantasy, without entitlement. Time had not been taken from him. It had been spent. Nathan stopped trying to be impressive. He discovered how much effort it took to maintain an image, and how unnecessary that effort had always been. Without it, he became quieter. Less visible. Less praised. And strangely, more at peace. Being ordinary no longer felt like failure. It felt like freedom. Presence did not arrive permanently. Some days, Nathan drifted. Old habits resurfaced. Attention wandered. But awareness had changed the rules. Each return to the present felt intentional now. Like choosing to wake up again and again. He learned that presence was not a destination. It was a practice. Nathan watched the world continue, fast, distracted, convinced of its own urgency. He recognized his former self everywhere. People postponing life. Promising themselves they would slow down later. Believing time was loyal. He felt no need to correct them. Awareness could not be forced. It only arrived when avoidance failed. Mortality no longer felt dramatic. It felt procedural. Inevitable. Neutral. What unsettled Nathan was not the ending, but the idea of returning to unconscious living before it arrived. He no longer feared dying unfinished. He feared living unattended. Gratitude arrived quietly. Not the kind that demanded expression or recognition, but the kind that settled deep. Gratitude for mornings that still arrived. For clarity that came before the final chapter. For awareness that had not come too late. He had not been spared. He had been warned. Nathan understood now that life did not ask to be maximized. It asked to be noticed. There were no grand conclusions. No dramatic transformations. No public redemption. Only alignment. Only attention. Only days lived awake. Nathan Cole did not leave behind monuments. He left behind moments. Moments where he was present. Moments where he listened. Moments where he stopped waiting. The clock continued ticking. But it no longer controlled him. When the end eventually arrived, as it does for everyone, it would not find him rushing. It would find him here. Nathan Cole once believed time was something you earned. He learned, too late for some things, but early enough for others, that time was something you honored. And once gone, it never returned.